Great, fantastic. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? It's all right, you can talk back. I do not bite, I promise. We can have a conversation. Good, yeah. I've also been told by one of you very kindly that it's a bit loud, so we're also going to try and talk a bit louder so you can hear us well. But it's my absolute pleasure to be joining you all today on this beautiful, sunny Parisian day in this gorgeous venue at the 9th Change Now Summit. My name is Hilda Liswani, founder and CEO of We Bloom, a media house based in Zurich, rebuilding trust between society and public and private institutions. So I'll be your moderator for today's session, and we have a really great set of conversations lined up for you. So what we're really trying to solve for is how do we, rapidly decarbonize transport and making sure it's affordable, inclusive, and also driving up the quality of life around cities. So in order to reach our objective, we have 3 sessions for you today featuring phenomenal speakers and experts in the mobility field. First and foremost, the 3 sessions, there will be a keynote, there will be a panel, and then a closing fireside. So without further ado, happy to introduce the first keynote, our first mayor of Mannheim, Diana Pretzell. Please join me in giving her a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Okay. It's even better. I have my microphone with me already. So, hi, Hilda. Thank you for your warm welcome. And hey, ladies and gentlemen, maybe I put this away, that we don't have any tone. I'm happy to be here. It's such a wonderful conference, and I would really like to thank everybody who is organizing this, because it's so important that we get into touch with each other and that we learn from each other, because this is the future, and the future is ours, and that's why we are here, and that's why I'm here. So mobility is not only the backbone of our economics, and the economics at the moment, the infrastructure, at least in Germany, is not the best. So we even have to bring it on their way, but it's also the heart of climate transition, because the citizens are feeling this first. If this is changing, the climate change is changing, and they feel this. So it's directly focusing on their daily life. It connects because it connects jobs, it connects goods to markets, it connects all our regions to the opportunity they need for whatever brings us together. So, as you already said, the mobility has to be reliable, accessible, and fast, and even brings people together from all over Europe and the world, just like here. So this is what we need. But there's a big but, and that's why we are here, because mobility has the CO2 emission of mobility is 20 to 25% worldwide. Wow! So this the impact is high, and what is even more important, it's still growing. Most of the other things are going down, but mobility and the CO2 emission is still growing. So this is the big challenge we are facing, and especially in Europe, it's still 25%, and the largest emitting sector in many member states. So there's some homework to do for all of us. And even it raised for about a quarter since 1919 in Europe. And what is especially rising? It's still the transport of the road transport, and especially the passenger cars. I think that's everybody would even have suggested, but I would not have suggested it's that much. It's 60%. So this is necessary. But gladly, we are in Paris. And in Paris, if you just go out of the door, you will see how it could work. I went to Paris yesterday with my little son. He's 4 years old. And if I would have run in every other city, almost every other city in Europe, I could not just have left him running with his little bike, running bike. But here you can. And that's what I want to tell you, because this is mobility for every generation, for everybody then changes if the mobility of the car changes, because then it's a lot more safety and the city is coming back to the citizens and to the visitors. So I think that should be our aim. And now, at the moment, still it's hard to do this change because, of course, mobility is in our DNA. And so we can't just run it down. And that's why we are here. We want to change it. We want to have a transformation. Facing the Iraq war and the oil crisis we just have, it might be a little different at the moment and a lot better. And also facing that Europe is a continent which gets hottest of all continents, the fastest. So we have two things that maybe help us a little bit. What is interesting for me is that citizens in all over Europe really want this transformation, but they want it to be reliable, they want it cheap, that helps us with the Iran crisis at the moment, and they want it accessible and sustainable. That's what they really want. And I think also safe. That's also, at least in Germany, a topic that is important. So what can we do on that? In Germany, we had a very interesting movement with the Deutschland ticket. That's something that came up in the 2023 year when the Ukraine crisis came up and everything got really expensive. So the government thought, we have to do something for people. And what they decided, it came from the Green Party, was that they brought up a ticket for €9 with which you could use all local traffic in all over Germany for €9 per month. So that was really interesting because then it came up and 54% more used this public traffic, regional public traffic. Also, it was not as fast, but it was really cheap. So really a change came up. This ticket now is not €9 anymore. It costs now 64 and for students 42, but it's still cheap. And moreover, it's really easy. You get on the train and you pay once and then you just have this ticket and it works. So that's really interesting, I think. But it works in the cities. We can also learn from that it doesn't work that good in the rural areas because we still have the same transport system, of course, yeah? There are no more trains or no more buses going up in these rural areas. So what can we learn from that? We can learn that you have to change the price, it helps. But if you want to reach everybody, you also have to change the system as a whole. Or you decide, we use public transport for the cities and we use other things for the rural areas. Yeah, also this might be a solution. And from my part, I think this will be the solution because public transport, to bring a train in every village will not work. Yeah, even a bus will not always work. So this, I think, has to be a mixture of solutions. But it has to be affordable and it has to work with people's real life. So, and I think what we can also learn, you need multi-level governance for the solutions, because as a city, we would not have been able to do this Germany ticket. Only because the government decided that we have now this easy access to it, and it's still not easy. I can also tell this to you, because there are still people who think it's too expensive, we still need the car, and so on. So also, I think you all know that the car, at least in Germany, is a status symbol. So this is also something, a cultural change that people have to do. Yeah, and I think not everybody will do it as a whole, but most people will do it as long as the framework is a lot easier, and therefore we need politics, of course. So, what did we do in our city in Mannheim? Because there are still a lot of things you can do as a city. And Mannheim is, I would say, one of the transport cities in Europe. Because, why? We invented the car. We invented the bike. We invented the tractor. And we invented the system for fast trains. So I think we know about transport quite a lot. But whatever, what did we do? In the year, we built up a mobility plan. A mobility plan for the year 2035 plus. This tries to bring transport into walking, into cycling, and into public transport as a center of transport and mobility. And what did we also do? We invented an app where everything can be connected. So you go in the city, you go on the mobility hub, and then you just mix in between this. And you can find very easy on the app where you change to the bike that it's just around and so on. So this is, I think, one of the keys we need to bring people into action. What did we as well? We have a cycling infrastructure that really grew a lot. When I started in Mannheim 5 years ago, everybody told me, you need a car. Being a mayor, I decided, besides of all other mayors who have a car, not to have a car, but only a bicycle, and it works. Yeah, but it works because we have created bike lines that are really fast to other cities. And where you can drive in the region very fast to your job, for example. And the public transport is also went up a lot with bigger trains, with longer trains that are coming faster. And they also go to the other cities as well. So it's not our own city public transport, it's a regional public transport, and I think this is really the key for it. And in our new neighborhoods that just grew up, for example, Spinelli, we developed special things. We have a low-carb neighborhood. Parking is organized in central hubs, and the everyday mobility is walking, cycling, and shared mobility, and it's really used. But for this, you also need supermarkets around, that people don't have to drive far. You need pharmacies around and things like this. So daily life has to be organized as well. So you see, it's a multi-thing to organize that mobility works. And I think you have to have 5 targets. It has to be emission-free, healthy, safe, and smart. And I would also like to give you some examples what we do with our local Green Deal team, because we have a team helping companies, helping everybody in the neighborhood to bring things forward for climate change. And one of the managers is one for mobility. We also have some for landscapes. We have one for nature and so on. But he is doing a challenge for walking and cycling. And if you are having a lot of kilometers, you win a prize. We also offer a fast charging infrastructure. And that's what I told you. I think this infrastructure is important if you come from the rural areas, because then you need this infrastructure also to come into the city, of course. And we offer on-demand public transport called FIPS to connect better in the cities. And as I told you, the app I was already talking about. So, but for this all, I told you, we need Europe. We need the multi-level governments, the nations, the regions, because we are not able to do that alone. And we have a clear roadmap from Europe that is good to climate neutrality, and now they launched the city agenda, which also again underlined this target to zero emission mobility, smart logistics, and sustainable urban transport systems. And this should be the game changer also for Europe for us, because we need also industry to change. We need strong regions, because then we can create jobs on that. And that, from my point of view, is what we really need. And we need programs like Horizon Europe that help us to develop smart traffic systems, as I told you, electric public transport, and living laboratories, whereas Mannheim, to see the change and to see the change of behavior that really helps us. So what do we need from the European Union? We need strong and reliable funding within the multi-annual financial framework for sustainable urban mobility, and a transport budget by the European Union, especially for cities. That's, from my point, very important, because we are the ones who change the system. Secondly, we need to be clear about the priorities. We need to go to electrification, away from traffic jams, away from car dependency, away from urban development, which is not in a good way. So that's what we need to invest in as European Union, and I ask the politicians to do that. And third, we need truly integrated digital mobility systems. As I told you, we need apps to bring things together. We need this Europe-wide. I just went by bike from Munich to Venice, and I needed to bring the bike back, and it was almost impossible, because you couldn't bring the Italian, the Austrian, and the German train system together. So this is something we need in mobility, to bring all this mobility as one. We need Europe as one mobility point. And finally, we need regulation that is certain for CO2 emission standards. And if we don't do that, you undermine the efforts of cities and regions on their way to climate neutrality. So what we really lack is we don't lack solutions, but what we lack is speed and scale. And that's what we're here about, I think, and the cities offer you the framework to do that, but we need the multi-level governments to do it together on this way. And then we can create cities that are even working for elderly people, for my little son, and for the families and parents I am, so that everybody finds their way of transport that is safe, that is transport for the future, and that create conditions through target investments, strong partnerships, and allows sustainable mobility to become the easiest choice. So I ask you to bring even more ideas in today, and so I can also learn from you. And I hope you to have a really good talk here on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Wow, let's also give it up for the city of Mannheim. I did not know that the city invented cars, trains, and bicycles. So basically the reason why we're all here today is thanks to the city of Mannheim. Thanks for that, Diana. So speed and scale, indeed, that's what we're looking for today, and that's what we're trying to achieve with the session. But before I go into the next panel, I want to take a bit of a poll of the audience, because I think transport and mobility is something that's so universal. It affects us all. As I said, it is the way we all got here. So with no judgment, I want to understand, how did we all actually get here today? So who took an e-bike to get here? All right, okay. Who took an Uber? Probably some people did, but maybe we're feeling a little judged. Who took public transport? Train, whoa. All right then. Okay, this is good. Great. We're talking to the right people. So Diana, I really like the way you gave us some criteria of how we can assess sustainable, affordable transport. These 4 criteria: emissions-free, healthy, safe, smart. I think that's a really great lens to try and understand what does sustainable, low carbon, inclusive transport systems look like. And so to really kind of dig deep into this topic, you also mentioned a few trade-offs. It's not so simple. There's legacy infrastructure. There are mindsets that need to be changed. There are cultural headways as well. So to help us unpack that, I am happy to welcome on stage our panel, Mr. Christophe Gros, Director of Energy Transition from Enedis. Quite the fan base you've got here today. Mr. Thomas Osdoba, Director of NetZeroCities, and Toussaint Wattinne, co-founder and CEO of Upway. Let's go. Hey. All right, so your mics are over there, so make sure everyone's got a mic so people can hear us. Good. Great. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this conversation. I want to, set the first question for you, Christophe, because you work on smart charging projects, and I want to understand from you, beyond the technical grid capacity, is there a regulatory or behavioral hurdle that currently prevents, let's say, a neighborhood from sharing energy between electric vehicles and local buildings today?
Okay, thank you very much, Hilda. Yeah, we are currently working on smart charging because smart charging, regarding all the mobility segments and regarding all use cases for charging, smart charging is really necessary, and it brings benefits to everyone. It will bring benefits to the electric system, but it will bring benefits to the customer himself. For instance, if you can charge during the solar hours in the summer, you will take advantage on very cheap electricity prices. Then we've got to smart charge, and we work on it, we develop it, we allow it at Enedis. And then another topic is sharing electricity, and this is also possible. There's no real barrier. It's fast developing in France. We've got a frame called collective self-consumption. People join locally, and they are generating their own electricity and sharing it at a local scale. And we've got thousands of, between 1,000 and 2,000 operations still running in France, yet running. And for instance, I could tell about operations led by social landlords. We've got one in, for instance, in the Lorraine region with 125 families benefiting from low-price electricity generated locally. Then there is no real barrier. It's developing. It's fast growing.
So there's no real barrier. What are we doing here? Thank you so much, Christophe. Maybe to pivot a little to you, Thomas, because you work with 112 cities, as stated in your mission. What do you believe? Because I think even listening to Christophe, there are many solutions out there. There are many pilots. But one thing we just cannot reach is the scale. And what do you think is preventing us from transforming all of these pilots to get to scale?
Thanks for the question, and I'll clarify. I probably don't work with 112 cities myself. I think I'd be a skeleton if I tried to do that. But NetZeroCities is supporting 112 cities on an aggressive program to try to achieve climate neutrality in an accelerated fashion. And it's a really interesting opportunity to probe on the question you're asking about how do we get to scale faster, how do we replicate more readily. And I think, I remember 30 years ago, we used to say pilots are where good ideas go to die. And I think the reality is not quite that cynical, but I think what we do find in many cases is that pilot projects are developed either because it's already pushing the envelope of what people think is possible, and so they're not necessarily trying to do more than that, or it's because it's all they have resources for. And so we end up scoping something as a pilot. And oftentimes that doesn't lead to follow-on action because it's disconnected from broader processes. And I just want to ask, how many people are familiar with the process that Stockholm went through when they adopted their congestion pricing mechanism for the center city? Anybody familiar with that? It's almost 20 years old now, or roughly 20 years old. So they conceived it as a pilot. And they took advantage of the natural geography they had, which is, the center city is an island with 7 points of entry. And so easy to put in a congestion pricing pilot. But what they did is they didn't just put it in place for a 6-month period of time. They put it in place 6-month period of time with a referendum at the end. And so there was an immediate trigger to what happens next. It wasn't just, well, we'll do it, and then we'll analyze it, and then we'll see, which is a recipe for doing nothing, because it's too easy for people to refrain from the hard action that comes. And what they found was the referendum passed, and it passed by a significant margin because people saw the benefit, and they embraced it more as a pilot because they felt involved in the decision-making that would follow. So to get past that, I think one of the things, I just made 3 quick notes around how to think about process if you're the city in particular. One is to really think about the direct process steps that come out of the end of the pilot project. So replication and scaling, what would that look like? And be quite detailed about that in designing the pilot itself. The second is to make sure resources are there to support the needed action and inputs for decision making immediately following the pilot. Again, if it's to do a pilot, stop and then analyze it, it's very unlikely you're going to find the kind of momentum that you're looking for, because it's too easy for resistance, it's too easy for entropy to take over, and you end up not moving forward. And then the third would be to have an explicit engagement of political decision makers and citizen stakeholders on the implications of what a successful pilot means. So if this works, this is what happens next. And you're having that conversation in advance with stakeholders, with political decision makers, so that everybody has the same expectations.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, I totally agree. And indeed, I think trying to design for scale from the outset, right? This is what I'm understanding from you. Really intentionally wanting a pilot to scale and designing it in a way that makes sure that the roadmap is prepared for that. And one of the things you mentioned is also one of those hurdles that's a bit more of a slow burn, right? There's not like a turnkey solution when it comes to changing mindsets and perception of alternatives and pilots. And for that, I want to come to you, Toussaint, because you are building e-bike solution across Europe and also in the US. And something that we've all touched upon today is, tackling the perception of some of these solutions, the perception of e-bikes, which at the moment is still seen to be more niche, more catered to a specific type of user, a more kind of, eco-conscious user. How do you deal with that as you're running a startup that, needs to scale? So you need a kind of a big TAM. Can you tell us a bit about this perception and how you're tackling that at Upway?
Yeah, totally, and we can definitely share an interesting perspective because we operate in 9 countries, as you mentioned, in Europe and the US. And so we also see the difference in perception across Germany, Netherlands, compared to France, the US, or Spain. And so it's really interesting to see the journey that each of these countries is going through. I think the first thing that stands out is that e-bikes is probably the fastest way to to electrify mobility today in cities and even in rural areas. And I think that's because what you see is that the barrier to acquire an e-bike and use an e-bike is very low, and it's a very powerful way to replace 1 in 2 trips done by car today. A stat that is probably not known enough is that 1 in 2 car trips travel less than 10 kilometers. This is the kind of distance that e-bikes are perfectly suited for. It's fit for purpose because you can effortlessly ride longer distances, uphill, headwind, you name it. And so what that means is that we're seeing this huge shift happening and each country is at a different stage of that transition. But the reality is, we're seeing that you can avoid congestion, you can avoid parking tickets, and have an easy way to move around for the half trips done by car today. But when you do that transition, and when people basically move to e-bikes, it doesn't just change traffic, it changes cities. Because what you find is that you get quieter streets, less air pollution, more active citizens, and so healthier people, and a lower cost of living. Because again, the cost of ownership is so much lower than the cost of ownership of a car. And so what that means is that the first thing that we see happen and that we need for the perception to change is to raise awareness of all of these benefits. But it's not just the benefits in theory, it's also the benefit to your everyday life. People don't adopt some kind of theoretical mobility solutions from one day to the next. They adopt convenience. And the powerful thing about e-bikes is that they become incredibly convenient to a very vast population. I think there's a great illustration, in Paris here today. Within the last 10 years, Paris has become a super influential biking city. And largely because people have adopted and jumped onto this the bandwagon of the convenience of e-bikes. And there was no better illustration than that, than the mayor celebrating his election on an e-bike, which shows just the journey we've been on in a city like Paris. So clearly this perception is happening and the change is happening. And what we need more of is, first, the convenience of e-bike is making that happen by default. But on top of that, raising awareness of the multiple benefits that light electric mobility can bring to cities can help more countries jump on the e-bike bandwagon.
Thank you. You had me at avoiding parking tickets, so I'm sold. I think that's great, and indeed it's something that requires awareness. It also requires more data points, right? We kind of have to prove to the public and society with some evidence-based approaches to show that this is a better alternative. It is convenient, low cost, all of the amazing things you said. So we're not there yet, but I think we are definitely going in the right direction. And coming to the point about an evidence-based approach, I'd like to bring it back to Christophe, because you're running the electric mobility lab, testing some solutions on smart charging, and operating very large fleets. So I want to understand from you, as you are at the very early stage of some of these testings of new solutions, how do you go about bridging, the theory and the practice at Enedis?
Okay. Yeah, we've got a luck at Enedis. It's that we've got both a theoretical way of seeing the smart charging, the devices, the use cases. We've got a lab to test all that use cases, that technologies. And we've got another source of feedback being our fleet, because we operate a fleet of nearly 8,000 electric vehicles now. We are aiming 50% share in 2026, and it's a way for us to lower our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We've got a commitment to lower it by 30% by 2030. And we spared 5 million liters of diesel last year thanks to the electric vehicles. Then we've got experience on the field, and then we can combine both lab and field experience. And what we see is that there is no one size fits all. There are technologies that are not yet mature, that can be mature for some use cases, but not for all use cases. For instance, we are working on induction. It's not mature for every use case. For someone, it can be mature, it can be useful, but not for every use case. Then our approach is really a test and learn. There's much to learn, much to innovate. We must test it in the lab, test it in the field, and innovation is key. And there is a long way, but we were on it.
Amazing, and I like to see how some of the dots are connecting, right? As Thomas mentioned about, building pilots to scale. Are you also having that approach in your lab, with the tests that you make? Are you considering the scaling component?
The scaling to have a bigger, we are focused on, succeeding, let possible the development of electric mobility. It has been said, electric mobility is key to decarbonize transportation, to decarbonize the economy. We know that the transport is a huge source of carbon emission. Just let me highlight first that in France we've got two major assets. We've got low carbon electricity, and 95% of electricity generated in France through nuclear, renewable, is carbon free. And we've got another major asset, that's we've got a robust electric network that allows to connect generation to consumption, and it goes both ways. We've got more and more people that self-generate part of their needs. And we've got everything in place to be at the scale of mobility for every segment from bikes to cars to public transportation to light to heavy trucks. It gives benefits, including for the cities, because when a truck enters the city, electric truck, there is no CO2 emission, there is no other gas emission, and it's a huge benefit for local, way of or local people living there. And then everything is in place to be at the scale. We can address all the mobility segment and all the charging use cases, being at home, on the motorways, fast charging, slow charging. Then we are focused on succeeding the electric mobility for everyone and every segment.
Thank you, Christophe. With that in mind, maybe we can kind of take this to the ground level and bring it back to you. As you mentioned, you work in cities and you advocate for zero emission delivery zones. One of the hurdles I imagine in rolling out these zero emission delivery zones is the social friction between small local businesses who fear these zones and the sort of solutions that are being proposed. How do you sort of suggest that cities handle the social friction from your experience?
Thanks. Yeah, right now across the cities involved in the mission, one of the things we're exploring quite a lot is how to go from a lot of pilot projects that have been started around urban logistics and moving away from large trucks or fossil fuel powered vehicles for delivery to those that are fossil fuel free and at an appropriate scale. And I think it's definitely at the forefront of what we're doing right now. And by far the most important thing in engagement of small local businesses in a community is to not engage them as if you're seeking their consent. Because it really reduces it to a transactional relationship that's not going to go well in terms of good decision making. You really want to build an authentic, credible relationship that builds trust, and that means engaging them as real stakeholders. And if you can do that through your processes and spending time, because it is an investment of resource to build that relationship and spend time, you can start to really get past sort of the first layer of engagement and look at data together. There's pretty good data that shows in communities that local businesses where there's street parking for cars versus where there's not street parking for cars, but maybe for bicycles and more pedestrian amenities, they actually do better. They do more business, more customers, and the customers stay longer and spend more money. So there's decent data to support that. I think the other thing is to engage in a conversation around placemaking. Since I've come over to Europe about 8 years ago, one of the things I notice is a lot of times there are really great small local businesses, but they're maybe in the wrong space. It's maybe too big, it's maybe around the corner as opposed to on the street, and I think cities really need to build up their placemaking capacity and do more around designing better experiences, both for pedestrians and customers and for the businesses themselves, who often are trying to make it work in places that aren't ideally set up, but that's what's available, that's what they think's available to them. So I think that's a critical piece to part of the strategy. It's also true that the benefits of less congestion, better air quality, a more inviting neighborhood are really attractive to customers who local businesses care about. The last thing I want to say, just very briefly on a broader note, it's very important for cities right now to be engaged with small local businesses. The current economic order is really stacked against them. And I think we really need to recognize that cities and small businesses need to work together in order for those businesses to survive. To avoid doing something because it may feel difficult is a recipe for what's going on now, which is a continued trajectory away from supporting small local businesses.
Yes, I totally agree. I think I also sense that there is a lack of trust between, the cities and the locals of, respective cities. And I think that, leads us to a great segue to you, Toussaint, because you are one of these startups who are working in cities and also with local communities. And I want to build a bit on what you said before, building this trust among local community, but also having to work on with the cities to, have the scale and the access at the end of the day. When we look at, the perception, and at Upway, you're really focused on, the resource efficiency of mobility. How do you, bring this message home for policymakers and the public, and kind of, bring this idea of refurbishment being more inclusive and sustainable? What is your strategy? What is your approach? And what are some, successes or failures that you've experienced?
Yeah, I think for a bit of context, since everyone probably doesn't know about Upway, we buy and refurbish used e-bikes, and then we resell them online under warranty. And as I mentioned earlier, we do that in 9 countries in Europe and the US. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we, the mission and the reason we started Upway was to make light electric mobility accessible to everyone. So this idea of inclusivity is at the heart of what we do, and sustainability as well, and I'll come back to that. But our first conviction is that the only way we will succeed at transitioning towards clean mobility is if it can work for everyone. And the reality today is that it's not always affordable to do so. So affordability is absolutely key. And to us, and to me, e-bikes are a first major unlocker of that, because the total cost of ownership of e-bikes is a lot lower than car ownership. And the second aspect that we are investing a lot of our energy into is to use the second-hand refurbished market as a way to lower that barrier of entry even further. So on average, we've sold 100,000 e-bikes in the last 4 years since we got started, and our average selling price is half of the retail price of the bikes we sell. So clearly, we can continuously fight to make light electric mobility more and more affordable and more inclusive by design. And it's very clear that any national policy that overlooks bikes, e-bikes, refurbished e-bikes as part of its strategy is missing out on a very cost-effective way of getting everyone on board with a cleaner mobility solution. Secondly, it's sustainable not just because it's low emission or no emission. It's what we're striving to achieve is to make sure that every e-bike that makes it to the market has the longest lifetime possible. And so by design, what we're doing is ensuring that every product that is there is used for longer and is used better by making sure that we can refurbish it, repair it, replace the parts. And that's another key component in my view of making sure we can reduce, of course, the waste footprint of the category, but also the CO2 emissions, because 2/3 of the emissions per kilometer of an e-bike today come from the manufacturing stage. And so the more we can extend its lifetime, the more mileage that bike can do, the more we're offsetting this initial carbon footprint over a longer time and a longer lifetime. So that's really what we're focusing on. And I think the message is the more policymakers can fully realize that, one, it's at a time of tight public finances, one of the most cost-effective ways to transition towards electric mobility is to encourage bike and e-bike adoption. And second, to make sure that we're designing systems and products that have the longest lifetime possible to offset this manufacturing stage over the longest time possible.
No, that's amazing, and like the cost effectiveness, I think, is really key in this piece, but also very important to engage the public sector, right? And I think another sort of elephant in the room when we talk about transport and mobility is, the infrastructure hurdles, right? I think most of us do want to adopt more sustainable, more efficient mobility and transport practices, but sometimes the infrastructure isn't working in our advantage to do so. And here I'm referring mainly also to charging deserts, for example. So when you do have an electric vehicle or an electric bike, it can be hard to keep the energy going just because of charging deserts. So I'd like to bring the next question over to you, Christophe, to give us some insights on fast charging on highways as a priority, but how is Enedis ensuring that the grid in lower income urban areas where residents lack, for example, private garages, how are we considering this within these communities?
You're right that the infrastructure is key because people, it can be a barrier, a psychological barrier first. Because, for instance, in France, we've got one of the best equipped countries in Europe. We estimate that we've got more than 2,800,000 charging points, mainly at home, but including 190,000 charging points on the public, being streets, being supermarket parking lots, etc., and including 40,000 fast charging points. Then we've got a good, well-equipped country, but we can say that we don't have any charging deserts for now, but we have to adapt, we have to upgrade the infrastructure at the good pace. The good pace is not the same pace everywhere. The good pace is the pace that allows all the charging needs to be satisfied. It can be fast charging on the motorways, it can be slow charging at home, in rural, in urban cities. And the key for it is to forecast and to plan the development of the network and of the infrastructure. And for this, we've got to have a dialogue with all the stakeholders, beginning with the local authorities. Because when you're in dense areas, you've got to have a dialogue on what is the aim, where is there a place to install charging facilities, and then the dialogue is the key, the forecasting, planning. We are planning in France up to 2035 and up to 2050 now. We are on very long cycle of planification, and this will ensure there is no charging deserts in the future years. There is no, for now in France, charging desert, but we have to do, and it's doable. We can do it for people to have a facility to charge vehicle and not to be feared of missing electricity because it's a psychological barrier. Our employees, when they've got their first electric cars, the fear of it, is the battery enough to have all the day, the work day satisfied, but when they have the electric vehicle, they don't want to get back to thermic one. We often say at Enedis that electric mobility is not possible, it's better.
Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, I mean, the infrastructure hurdles are there, but indeed, once you go electric, it's hard to go back. Maybe coming back to you on this one too, Toussaint. Really sticking to the infrastructure piece. And I'd like to hear from you, based on your experience, based from data that you've gathered. What do you think is the single biggest missing piece in the city, or the infrastructure in the city, that would make your users feel safer and more supported?
Yeah, infrastructure plays a huge role, and it's great to have had an introduction by the city of Mannheim, because of course they're an example that plays a leading role in building the infrastructure that helps change mobility habits. The first piece of infrastructure that any city needs is protected cycling infrastructure. That means protected lanes that are continuous and which make riding a bike feel totally normal as opposed to feeling risky. And that's exactly what's happened in the Netherlands since the 1970s. They started, for the last 50 years, they invested in these protected bike lanes. That's what makes more people feel safe, and therefore more people ride. And the more people ride, the more people feel safe, because suddenly it's a totally normal sight to have plenty of bikes around. And so car drivers typically start getting used to it, and everyone understands how to best travel together. So the first piece of infrastructure is definitely protected bike lanes, not just a piece of paint on the streets, but actually dedicated and separated bicycle infrastructure. The second thing of infrastructure is a bit more at a national level, especially, is more of a financial infrastructure to really make e-bikes accessible to everyone. And again, that's where Germany is a great example. We know that the single most effective policy is to introduce bike leasing schemes with tax benefits for employees. And that's a scheme that has been incredibly popular in Germany. Employees benefit from a tax saving. Employers improve their employees' experience at no extra cost to them. And countries accelerate adoption of bikes and e-bikes across the board. And just to finish on a simple number, Germany in 2016 was selling 500,000 new e-bikes and 3.2 million new cars, so 6 times more new cars than e-bikes. By 2022, so only 7 years later, they were selling 2.2 million new e-bikes and 2.6 million new cars. So only 20% more cars than e-bikes. Can you see the gigantic wave of change in people choosing which equipment they're gonna buy to move around? And a major driver of that has been the combination of safe bike lanes and a financial infrastructure through bike leasing that has made it easy for anyone to adopt an e-bike.
Thank you for that. And you know, earlier in the speakers lounge, you also mentioned that Berlin is one of your biggest markets. So I guess that is a testament to some of these infrastructure policies that they have in place. So I am very conscious of time. So to round up our panel, I'd like to bring the last question to you, Thomas. You know, from your very high level perspective, working across many cities, if you could say, you know, if there was a specific gold standard city policy that really, you know, helped the private sector to change their business model rather than just greenwashing it, you know, because we're seeing a lot of greenwashing around some of these solutions that sound really great, but when it comes to implementation, maybe is not really bearing the benefits we're looking for. From your experience, what is maybe the one policy or few policies that you've seen actually stick and actually work?
Thanks, really good question, and I'll be pretty short because I know we are pressed for time. I think so far that gold standard doesn't quite exist. And I think one of the things we have is a workshop tomorrow with a lot of SMEs, some corporates and businesses and cities to explore what a tipping point looks like and where that will go. And I think from that, what I would like to get to is something that's akin to a gold standard on the procurement side. And for those who maybe haven't heard, there's a term in procurement called procuring the outcome. So instead of procuring a specific service or product, you're procuring the outcome and you're allowing the private sector flexibility and you're creating creativity in how that's being met. So collaboration from SMEs and large companies can happen, et cetera. That's really important because to get to zero carbon logistics and delivery, you need infrastructure to be aligned with policy and regulation, with data and coordination, and with the right business models. And it's impossible to procure all of those things if you're trying to prescribe the procurement. So if you procure the outcome, you'll allow that creativity to happen. And you're already seeing SMEs locally working with large companies, working with the Post and others to be able to make that system work. And so I think that's where we're headed, but we're not quite there yet. I think the goal will be in a couple of years to really see that take shape.
Amazing. So we need the creativity and agility to bring all of these cross-sectoral stakeholders together, because it is a very multi-pronged, challenging a trend, and it cannot be solved, as you mentioned, just by one member of the value chain. Everyone across the value chain needs to be aligned to make a difference. So thank you all again to the panelists for your inputs. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you so much. So I hope you're all still with me. The session is not over. We still have a fireside chat coming up. I know it's a tricky time because it's during your lunch, but we promise we will feed you food for thought, okay? It will be well worth your time. So our next session, final session, is a fireside chat with, I am not French speaking, so I hope I don't butcher your name, Gaël
Quéinnec.
Gaël Quéinnec from MOVIN'ON.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. So,
oh yes, here, they've already prepared it for us. Fantastic. Oh no, I think they've got your company and.
Yeah, no, it's not We Bloom. It's Moving On.
That's me. But
Yes.
you are from Moving On. I am from We Bloom. How are you doing, Gaël? How are you doing today?
Fine, and you? And yes, so maybe briefly I can introduce what is Moving On. Moving On is a coalition of companies, large companies, that coalesce to make sustainable mobility move forward faster through the ecosystems and the dialogue and supporting some projects. So we are an NGO, and we do this kind of things, which is a list of good ideas that are replicable for cities and to improve the mobility in their place.
Fantastic. So actually, this is a great next step to kind of build on the last conversation we just had, because we ended that panel on how do we get people together. It's such a complicated challenge. There's so many players, so many people, and you work particularly in bringing these players together. What are some of the, let's say, unspoken conflicts that you have perceived in convening some of these leaders and developing these solutions?
It's a very interesting question, because yes, if you ask people if they want to collaborate, everyone say yes, we do, and they actually do, sincerely do. But there are some unspoken, and one of the unspoken is that each party carry a different risk. The political parties, they carry the political risk, the states, the happiness of their citizens, and the polls, and the reaction that can, the resistance to change also, while the companies, they carry the value risk. They can make more or less profit, they can have a good or bad ROI. And so each party has a different risk, and this has to be explicit. Often it is not. It is just not explicit that, okay, we will create a change for better, but even if we seek for better, we still carry risk, and we don't carry the same one. So please put them on the table, put a governance that also discuss on the right metrics, because often the metrics are too narrow or too object-related instead of result-oriented, and by making this unspoken conflict just explicit, because it's normal, it's inherent of the mission of each party, often it starts much better. It's not everything is not solved, but it starts much better.
So putting the risks on the table from day one, you find really beneficial. So everyone is aligned on what are the various incentives and risk profiles that each party is bringing. And if we kind of look at the solutions that we want to see manifested in the real world, and today we're really talking about mobility as a tool for inclusive urban development. If you kind of give a broad scan for looking at mobility as a social catalyst, would you say there's a city at the moment, and leaving Paris out, because I think we're using Paris a lot as an example, but leaving Paris out, what city would you say is effectively using low carbon transport, not just to cut CO2, but also to bridge the wealth gap between its citizens?
So mobility is in essence a social catalyst. We are a mobile animal, and we need to meet. We need to meet to work. We need to meet to make friends. We need to meet to fall in love. To get heated. To everything. We need to meet, and so we need to move. So in essence, first, when you make the mobility better, you make the social ties better. But it's true that some cities are getting faster than others. There are always iconic examples, such as Medellin with the metro cable, which is very famous because really they integrated these technologies to de-isolate the hillside zones, and very well integrated in the metro system. And they also took some car-oriented infrastructure like Parque del Rio. They changed it into binding infrastructure. like Barcelona did also, and there are also all other iconic examples in Europe, like Copenhagen with the health around cycling, and Vienna with the €1 pass. But to me, I was very impressed, for example, to discover what Mannheim is doing, and that's to me the right example, and that's exactly the kind of examples we push in this kind of approach. Probably she won't get an Oscar or something for any innovation, but she's making a great bundle of effective bettering, effective improvement, which seems to be set in coherence, and even if each piece is not revolutionary, it's something that we have seen somewhere else. What is effective is a bundle, and it's just an effective way to make people happier. So we are not here looking at icons, even if there are some. We are much more looking in practical, effective, and cost-efficient also bundle of different layers, from the ground layer to the digital layer.
Right. And if we look at targets, I think, the sustainability sector, many sectors, we love a good target. We've got the 2030 coming up very soon. And then after that, the target always shifts, right, to 2050. And I think if we look at the 2030 target, we are nowhere near, reaching some of the expectations of that. And my question always in reaching these targets, we're always sort of reaching a target, but the progress is still very, very slow. If, in your experience, if you look at the people you talk to, what is the main thing that is needed to reach the speed and scale that Diana alluded to, also our panelists alluded to go from these isolated initiatives to really creating a robust, integrated system? What is the piece that's missing here?
The good example that we see and sometimes collaborate to are when people things are taken in a system. We often the money, transport money, which is big, $1 trillion of dollars until 2030. Is divided and split in silos. One budget, one action for infrastructure, one action for digital. While the experience, as we say, is systemic. You have an experience of mobility which is systemic. Thomas was talking about e-bike. It's a bunch of infrastructure of ground, but also digital, and also business case. It talked about the leasing conditions. So. Where it goes better and faster and further, it's when it's taken in systems, and there are it can sound like words, but you can at least debundle the contract. Having different layers of contract instead of a large integration animal or monster, and also. What we appreciate a lot is dynamic purchasing. I think it's the UK. They conceived a system of purchasing where even if there is an integration layer, you can in permanence add and integrate some innovations. That was even not existing. When you made the contract. If we think about IA, or if we think of the speed of electrification, most of the contracts that have been designed 5 years ago could not exist into account. So you have to dedicate the budgets, which are significant, into integrated, systematic, but contestable and evolutive contract. It's not something that is automatic, but if you think at this approach from the beginning, because you are around the table like MOVIN'ON provide, where you understand the different risks that every party carries, then imagination, and there are good examples, helps to make the good contract. and you are not stuck into a system that locks you, that maybe dreams in locking the customers. Maybe some big company, they have this temptation, but it's a risky temptation because you can be locked into past solutions also.
So basically what you're explaining, which is a great insight, is that their intention is systemic, but actually the way that the funding is rolled out and deployed is still in these silos and still very much separated from each other and not intuitive. And so how does one prevent these integrated systems from just serving the business models of the legacy transport giants, right? This is, I think, what's typically is the result, that all of the funding is so siloed that you just get the same results.
Yes, and there is a big temptation of the winner takes all. So there are strong actors. Often they are all members, by the way, that feel able and are indeed able to coordinate all the system, and then to turn a startup as only, I would say, subcontractors that have to ask the permission to integrate their solutions within a system that has been conceived without them. It can even be a blocker for them to enter in. So this winner takes all approach is dangerous because of the whole approach. The whole approach for a project that will last 10 years condemns you to be out of the state of the art at the end. While another example also that I like so much is the example of Montreal. That is Montreal, where MOVIN'ON has strong ties, where they have an indicator which is a leverage capacity of every public dollar. The public money can be used to de-risk some operation that then can be amplified by public, or just to put some guarantees to de-risk once again. And as a result, they put $100 million dollars on the table and leveraged on private side more than the double. So because they were not additioning, they were just using it as a leverage, and within kind of a flexible integration contract. So it's all about the trade-off. You need coherence, but coherence doesn't necessarily mean to block all the system, even if it can be reassuring it can be for your hierarchy. Yes, we control everything. Yes, we have no optionality. We will define the price and so on. Yes, this can sound safer, but in reality, it's more risky because of the time, because it works for a 1-year contract, 1-year business, but not for a 10-year transformation.
And our final question, I think I could sit here and talk to you all day and pick your brain, but I would like to talk about something I think that's a bit tricky to talk about in sustainability impact rooms, is the trade-off between resilience versus efficiency, right? We are all striving towards a future where also at the highest scale, mobility is climate resilient and also digital. But how do we ensure that these integrated systems don't become so lean that they lack the slack, the actual power needed to handle increased frequency, for example? And here I'm thinking a lot about freight and passenger flows. So how do we marry these worlds, efficiency and resilience?
So this is one of our favorite ones in MOVIN'ON, and it will be one of the key points of our summit October 9. I hope you come. And because...
Is that an official invite?
Yeah, I think so. And yes, because we tend to, and it's impressive even, how we are collectively still in this mindset of thinking about mitigation and adaptation separately. And adaptation came later. I remember the first change now, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was nothing about absolutely nothing about adaptation. It was even a little bit of taboo, because talking about adaptation was meaning that we were accepting somehow the failure or the partial failure of the mitigation. Well, no, I think that this step is past, but we are not at the point to really integrate, once again, a trade-off. It's a trade-off. You cannot harm resilience by putting or creating an over-performing and over-sophisticated, often, system. And conversely, you cannot just, because of resilience, fall back into what is proven, what is legacy, and which is extremely solid, the fossils, the cars, but belongs to the pre-IPCC world. And often the J+1, the day after a crisis, that's what happened. Everybody takes his cars because the cycle lanes are not working anymore, because everything is in chaos. So we come back to previous stages. And what we claim a lot for is that when you work on a mitigation project, have a resilience box in your checklist, and conversely, in both ways. So once you have put this on the table, solutions will mushroom, like controlled redundancy, just what is essential. So what has to be redundant, or what can be abandoned for 1 week. What you have also to do, and what we do, is pre-create communities where local actors, they talk about that. What is the more important in this area? This school or this school? This line or this line? This plant or this plant? You cannot decide this the day after a crisis like in Valencia. You have to imagine this. Maybe the crisis will be slightly different, but the more you have imagined it beforehand, the better you will be, and the tie they are created. It's not, when people need to coordinate, they need to know each other. I have to, hey, Hilda, how can we do? If I have to introduce myself, hey, I'm Gaël, I'm pleased to meet you, Hilda, I have a big need of your cooperation. This doesn't work. We have to pre-create these solidarities. So often, and we are still at the very beginning of well managing this trade-off. It's true that the mitigation has created a lot of complexity, a lot of fragility. For example, when we are talking of centralized energy systems, you can end with 500,000 people depending on one source. And if this source is flooded, what do we do? So it's an example. Or also just not having predefined a degraded level of service. We have SNCF in our ecosystem. For example, when there is a crisis, nothing says that they can be low to 50% services. So they try to be 100, and as they try to be 100 and to protect every line, everything, at the end being 30%. So while we all know with good sense, and we could all agree that some lines are more important and essential to the common life than others. But we don't do it. We do it in crisis times where it's the wrong time to cooperate.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gaël. I could go on and on with you. Thank you for your wisdom. So you are inviting us all to your summit in October, right? Did I understand that correctly?
The 9th of October, not very far.
Amazing. We will be there. Thank you, Gaël. Please give Gaël a warm round of applause.